John McMullen joining us to talk everything and anything Philadelphia Eagles football. John, welcome to the show, man. I'm going to avoid Sixers trust the process arguments with you.
And we're all day to day, like Mike Gill.
Just day to day. Lower body, upper body. All right, John. So there's a report coming out about Alshon Jeffery possibly being on the PUP list to start the season. You tweeted out, explaining PUP rules and offering up every option under those rules is not news. So I was looking at that before you came on. I was like, I don't know how to go about asking him about Alshon Jeffery.
Yeah, well, if you saw the report, that's what it was. It wasn't really news. We all know where Alshon is. He's on the PUP list. He's recovering from shoulder surgery. Still not able to practice. Week 1 has the goal. Since early in the process, it remains the goal. But what that report was just explaining the PUP rules and explaining every option. If he's not ready to go by week 1 and they keep him on the PUP list, he would have to miss the first 6 weeks of the season. If he's going to be ready before that, they can take him off the PUP list, carry him on the 53-man roster. If he's going to return by week 2, week 3. So my point was there's no real new news on Alshon. He's not cleared to practice. But the goal remains week 1.
Okay, because there's multiple different outlets here talking about Alshon Jeffery not going to be available on the PUP list. It's almost like they're trying to create more news and nothing's really there. So just to reiterate.
That's kind of the world we live in. It was an NFL Network report, and then it sort of gets aggregated around. But Alshon is, look, I mean, if you watch him, he's generally out at practice. You see him on the sidelines all the time, so he's not in. That's a good sign, because if you're not close, if you have some issues, they're not going to put you on the field. For instance, Tim Jernigan, who's going to be out for a while, he doesn't come out on the field. Brandon Graham is another one who does to watch practice. So I don't think there's any way he starts the season on the PUP list, because the Eagles are not going to want him to miss 6 games. If he misses a week or two, that wouldn't surprise me. Because, hey, we're getting up there. It's mid-August now, and he's still not able to practice. So I believe that's a possibility. I don't believe he's going to be shut down for 6 weeks. And if he is, it's because something's not going the way it's supposed to go. And there's no evidence of that because, as I said, he's on the practice field every day.
Right. All right. So news, Christian Hackenberg. Breaking news that he is now joining the team. You wrote an article on 97.3 ESPN about Hackenberg loving the process, John. So how about that for irony?
Yeah, I'm going to bar that word from any Philadelphia lexicon.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah, can you do that? Let's just move on with that. No, but I mean, listen, there's Twitter regarding the Hackenberg signing. There was different different feels from it. Is this something, anything, or nothing? Like, is this possibly a sign that we're not going to see Foles at all in the preseason, or is this just, let's get Hackenberg in here for practice as another arm and let Foles and Wentz hang out and do their own thing?
Well, you're not going to see much. You're not going to see Carson Wentz at all in the preseason. You're not going to see much of Nick Foles. I think ultimately you'll see a little bit. But I think this signing is more about next year, 2019, when the Eagles will not have Nick Foles, and then they need a backup, and sort of they don't want to hand it to Nate Sudfeld. They want some competition. And Christian Hackenberg's a guy who was once the 51st pick in the draft, obviously was a bust, but he does have some arm talent. And the second part is I think there's some haughtiness, to be honest, with the Eagles. And they think they can get somebody in that failed elsewhere and do some things with them. Maybe they can. We know they've turned Carson Wentz from small school prospect to MVP candidate in less than 2 years. Yeah. They turned Nick Foles from journeyman back up to Super Bowl MVP in a couple weeks. But I'll remind everyone of this Eagles quarterback incubator that everyone talks about. It was real, but two big parts of it are gone, and that's Frank Reich and John DeFilippo. So, look, I don't. From everything I saw from Christian Hackenberg with the Jets, doesn't look like he's a legitimate prospect, but it doesn't hurt to take a look at him, and that's what the Eagles are going to do.
Right. So you also talked a little bit about Jake Elliott struggling indoors. As far as I knew, he was having a great camp and nailing all of the kicks in practice outside at the NovaCare complex, but can you elaborate a little bit on how Elliott looks?
Well, he's looked great until today. He was Jimmy Kempski kind of tracks every kick during camp, and according to Jimmy, he was 32 out of 32 coming into today in kick training camp, and he missed 4 today. So I mean, it was a strange dichotomy, and Doug always tries to end practice on a high note. And he was trying to end it on a 48-yard field goal by Jake Elliott. He missed it wide left. They tried it again. He missed it wide right. And the third time, he finally put it through. So I don't think it's anything to be concerned about. I think it's just one of those days. But nonetheless, when you go 32 for 32, and then all of a sudden you're missing a bunch of kicks, it does raise some eyebrows.
Right. So I wasn't here Friday, John, after the game Thursday night, but I want your thoughts on Jordan Mailata from the Aussie. So he had a little bit of a struggle there when he first entered the game. But, what did you see over the weekend from him and even just from the game Thursday night? But, if you can give the listeners an update on the Australian rugby player.
Well, it was you could almost predict it. I think I did before the game. I mean, you could sense the fact that this is a kid who's never played football before at any level, at any time of his life. And then he's out there in an NFL game, even a preseason game. In his first pass setup, it was his third play. He gives up the sack, and it turned out to be a strip sack and a turnover. So that's the bad news. The good news is, he didn't get disappointed in himself. He didn't panic. He didn't get down, and he went back out there for the rest of the game, played the entire second half, and he held up pretty well, and much better than I thought he would. So the physical attributes we talk about all the time, he's plenty strong enough. He's got the athleticism to play left tackle, but he is as raw can be when it comes to technique for an NFL offensive tackle. So it's a long-term project. He's not going to help the Eagles this year. He's not going to play for them this year. But they do think he's got significant potential for down the road.
So over the weekend, there was a little bit of buzz on Twitter about Dallas Goedert. So tell us a little bit.
An explosion.
Yeah, explosion. So tell us a little bit about the Goedert situation, because while the reports of his demise were greatly exaggerated, he did have a minor little injury. So can you update us on that a little bit?
People were threatening us to get updates on Dallas Goedert. It's pretty amazing. He got a kick out of it because he comes from South Dakota, obviously, and just the craziness of this fan base, and he had to leave back to, and that was the open practice at Lincoln Financial Field. Turns out he had a little bit of an elbow injury, but all of a sudden on Twitter, there's some knucklehead that says they see him walking out of Lincoln Financial Field in an air cast, and it just takes off. And the Eagles don't have to give injury updates at this time of the year. It's not a rule by the NFL. You have to do that in the regular season. You don't have to do it in the off season, which is why you always get these upper and lower body explanations from Doug Peterson. Generally, we get the skinny one, we talked to the players themselves in the locker room. We finally got Dallas, and obviously he did not break his arm. He had a little elbow injury. He's back at practice today. In the locker room, I was joking with him. I just said, those stem cells are pretty amazing. And he said, yeah, I ripped off my arm and it grew right back. So he's not 100%. He's banged up. He's got an elbow injury. But he missed one day of practice. So there's no concern over Dallas Goedert.
Now, you had a nice piece up over the weekend on Avonte Maddox, and I got some nice advice from Malcolm Jenkins regarding his size. So tell us a little bit about your piece over the weekend and what you think of Avonte Maddox.
Well, Avonte Maddox has been taking first-team reps in the nickel spot, which is a bit of a surprise over the past two practices because throughout the entire camp, it's been Sidney Jones and Devontae Bosby back and forth each day. And then all of a sudden, there was a little bit of a shift. Jalen Mills was looked at one day in there, and now all of a sudden it's Avonte Maddox. And everybody looks at him, fourth-round pick, and he's 5'9", and they say because of his size, he's going to have to play in the slot. But he was a very, very good player at Pittsburgh, and he played outside cornerback. And so he's like a lot of young corners in this league. They've never been asked to play inside. They're not comfortable with it. But when you project the skill set, because of his height or lack thereof, you don't see him matching up with the Mike Evanses of the world or Julio Jones or people like that. So that's where the Eagles envision him. But Malcolm Jenkins, his locker's right next door. When we were all gathered around, he said, don't let him box you in. And he meant, don't let the people box you in as a nickel cornerback. He's got talent. He's played outside in the past. There are short corners that have succeeded in this league. Brent Grimes is one who's a Philadelphia native, played for a very long time. Chris Harris with the Denver Broncos has been a Pro Bowl cornerback. So Malcolm wants to make sure he doesn't box himself in as a nickel corner, and Avonte is trying to take that advice and do everything he can to impress the coaching staff. But right now, they're looking at him in the first-team nickel slot, and that's pretty good for a fourth-round draft choice.
Absolutely. John, just to stay in the secondary, I mean, we talk about this a lot, but rightfully so. I think it's the most intriguing position battle / kind of an open-ended who's it going to be type of question. But we talk about Sidney Jones a lot. Obviously, you just brought up, well, Frank brought up Maddox, but you went into detail about him playing some first-team nickel. If you had to say right now, I hate to put you on the spot, but if you had to say whose position is that at the moment? I know it's early, but like Sidney Jones, the more and more I hear about him, he's like almost too athletic and too much potential to even play nickel. Like he could be competing for one of the outside spots. Like how's this going to shape out, you think? I know it's early on, but how do you see it shaping out?
Well, Jim Schwartz has been true to his word, and he said really going back to the spring, he was going to roll bodies and take a look at everyone to see who fits in their best. And then, as I always bring up, the break glass in case of emergency, since Chip Kelly really was here, was always Malcolm Jenkins. And the fact that the Eagles seems every year, they spend an entire training camp looking for a nickel corner, and then you wake up and Malcolm's in there. Now, last year it worked out after the Darby trade, and Patrick Robinson had a great year, and you saw the Eagles' defense take off. And I think a big part of that was because when they do have a good nickel corner, then they can move Malcolm Jenkins all over the field. They can play strong safety, weak safety, dime linebacker, even outside corner at times. He played literally 6 different positions on that defense last year. When the bell rings September 6th, I have a sneaking suspicion, because you look at their opponents, the Atlanta Falcons, and you think about their receivers, Julio Jones, Mohamed Sanu, now they add Calvin Ridley. I have a sneaking suspicion, at least early, they're breaking the glass and it's going to be Malcolm Jenkins.
Wow. Interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. Now, John, how's Jordan Hicks looked over the past few days? Because he had a nice showing on Thursday, and obviously a huge role and a big season for him coming up. What have you seen out of Jordan Hicks over the past couple of days?
Well, Jordan Hicks is Jordan Hicks. He's a Pro Bowl linebacker. There's never any question about Jordan when he's on the field. All the questions involving Jordan are can he stay on the field? Right. And he's played. This is his fourth NFL season. 2 of his first 3 were cut in half by injury. And even if you go back to his time at Texas, he had a lot of injury problems. And that was one of the things that concerned people in the draft and why he fell a little bit. So that's literally the only question mark with Jordan Hicks is can he stay healthy? If he's healthy, he's going to make plays. He's proven that time and time again.
Right. Now, John, the defensive line, they essentially have 2 defensive lines as far as starting 4s. I mean, it's the deepest in the league in a lot of people's minds. I think that's a safe statement to make. How have you seen Schwartz kind of rotate those 8 guys, the Michael Bennett's, the Natas, and the Chris Longs of the world, splitting time with Jernigan, Cox, Graham, and Barnett?
Well, Tim's not healthy, so that's one issue, and he's not going to be there for the season opener. So he's going to be out for a while after the back surgery. But you still have a problem, and it's a good problem, but it is a problem. When Brandon Graham comes back, he's on the PUP list. He hasn't practiced. You have to look at what Jim Schwartz does in his so-called NASCAR package, which is his nickel pass rush, where you put your best 4 pass rushers on the field. Generally, it's been Chris Long and Derek Barnett. At the ends, Fletcher Cox and Michael Bennett inside. However, you got to find room for Brandon. And one of the reasons Chris Long was contemplating on whether he should retire or come back is because he looked at the landscape and he looked at how deep this team was on the defensive line and thought he wouldn't get enough snaps to make it worth his time. And to be honest, I don't know if he's going to get them because I don't know how you don't have Graham and Bennett and Barnett and Cox on the field in obvious pass rushing situations. You almost have to use those players, and there are going to be some other players because you mentioned how deep, and they are that deep, that are going to not get much playing time, and I think it could be an issue.
You tweeted about Josh Adams getting injured today. Can you give us an update on that?
Well, he hurt. It looked like his ankle on a pass play. Was forced to leave practice and didn't finish, and it's a shame because he had been putting together a really solid streak dating back really over a week. And Donnell Pumphrey is out with an injury, lower body. Corey Clement got hurt against the Steelers. He's been out with an ankle injury. So Josh has kind of been picking up the pace and making a run at that final running back slot. There's no concrete on how serious it is yet, so we'll have to wait on that. But obviously, as an undrafted player, that's the kind of injury that could be very, very hurtful to his 53-man roster spot. Now, I think worst-case scenario, he's going to make the practice squad, but he was really making a push to make the roster.
John, one final question here before we let you go. Frank and I were talking before you came on about who we think is going to have the breakout year for the Eagles, trying to predict an unsung hero, not someone who's completely on the radar. Obviously, it's an absolutely loaded roster, but I mentioned Mike Wallace. I think he's going to be an absolute huge addition to this offense, and you tweeted a little bit about him today and over the weekend. So if you want to give me your thoughts on Mike Wallace, and if you can give us another name that you are predicting to possibly have a really big year or a breakout year for the Eagles.
Well, you're right about Mike Wallace. He's a perfect fit for this team. Remember, this is a guy who has been a 1,000-yard receiver 3 different times in his career, can still run. He's the perfect fit for what the Eagles need. I think a lot of people have been disappointed with him because he was always ill-cast, whether it was Miami, Minnesota, Baltimore. They always expected him to be a number one receiver. He's not a number one receiver. But what he is a guy who can stretch the field. And here, in theory, Alshon Jeffery will be healthy. Zach Ertz is obviously a huge target for this team. Nelson Aguilar is a big part of that offense. And then he's a complementary piece. So you're talking about a guy who's never going to see a double team and can just run by people. He's going to be much, much better than Torrey Smith was in the same role. He's just a better football player. So you're right, that's a huge upgrade. And then if you're looking for another player, you're also right saying, look, there's not a lot of room for young players to play on this team because the roster is set, it's deep, and it's good. But if you're looking for it, it's going to be Sidney Jones or it's going to be Derek Barnett taking big leaps in each of their second seasons. Obviously, Sidney barely played last year. Derek Barnett, the Eagles want him on the field more than he was last season, and they want him to take that next step. That might be at the, as I mentioned, if he's on the field in nickel situations, that means Chris Long or Brandon Graham or Michael Bennett will be off the field. So it's a difficult decision, and it's one you'll have to see how Jim Schwartz handles it.
Absolutely. A lot of storylines here as the Eagles continue on in camp and preseason carries on as well. John McMullen will continue to carry on with us every day at 4 p.m., bringing you all of the Eagles inside news and notes. John McMullen, you're the man. I appreciate you coming on and giving us your knowledge for the day.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.